Greetings, conservatives. This is your humble host, John Moraga, and we are back with more Conservacast. We look forward to keeping you informed with the latest and most relevant commentary of conservative issues. So without further ado, here are a few topics I'd like to discuss. I'm going to be kind of free-flowing this today without anything pre-written, and so if there are a few more ums or empty spaces, otherwise known as dead air, the few gaps, understand that's where I'm coming from for today. To start off, I do want to address our most recent crowdfunding campaign at GoFundMe.com. We've got off to a pretty good start, and we have quite a ways to go, but we do appreciate everybody who has contributed thus far, and we do want to encourage you to go over to our site, GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Again, that's GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. And go ahead and check out a video that we've written there, or video that we've made there, and some of the description of what we've got going on. Everybody has been so kind to have helped out, and we continue to want to champion our platform and continue to bring you guys more media as we move along. So what I want to kind of dig into a little bit more today is some of my experiences from the military. Very briefly, many of you may already know, I was enlisted in the Air Force from 1997 to 2001, right before 9/11 occurred. And because I was straight out of high school, only 17 years old, I still had to have my parents technically sign my contract. And because I was as young as I was a bit naive, and so I went in without guaranteeing my job, and my contract basically was opened. So as I got into basic training and finished the first few weeks and was about to be sent away to my advanced training, I was informed that I would be joining the security forces. Now, as some of you may know, if you're familiar with the Air Force and how the military works, that is essentially the only combat-related career field in the Air Force, with the exception of the Special Forces. It wasn't a specialized unit that I tried to get into. It is basically the combat defense wing of the Air Force. More specifically, anti-terrorism training and how to deflect terrorist attacks. So what that means is that we were essentially responsible for the protection and defense of the base that we were stationed at and whatever surrounding area that was controlled by the federal government. And so we also were responsible for law enforcement tasking, and our jurisdiction was essentially the same boundaries of the base and whatever extended out. For example, I was out in Vandenberg, and so even though the one of the highways was partially controlled by civilian police, it also ran through the base, and so we kind of had a joint jurisdiction, if you will. But mainly our responsibility was for combat defense should we ever be attacked, or in certain instances if I was overseas or we were stationed somewhere else, not in the U.S., we would be responsible for that territory. Now, I bring this up because, as I said, I went in 1997. Now, that was a kind of a buffer time era, if you will. It was pre-9/11, and it's kind of hard to remember what society was like prior to 9/11. We're so accustomed now to terrorism and terrorist attacks that prior to that, a lot of my training was, at the time, very specialized because I had to get proficient in small arms and large arms. For those of you who don't know what that terminology means, it's basically like an M9 handgun or up to the M60 machine gun. And so we also had to learn different tactical strategies, etc. And it's interesting because I bring all this up to address a kind of generational gap. Now, I'm at fault of being partly in one generation and partly at another. I shouldn't say I'm at fault, but basically my age placed me in that kind of buffer area. And what I mean by that is a lot of the older troops who I was trained with and stationed with were very much more old school, as the saying goes. There was a lot more of what you might see from movies or TV, the military mentality, the very strict discipline, there were a lot of unwritten rules that were already expected of people prior to going into the military. That even though their job was to be trained and heavily disciplined, there was an expectation that there were certain norms that were to be adhered to once they got in and while they were in. After I had gotten in, shortly after, and especially the longer I was in, I started to see a drastic trend. And this could even be said about my time in high school, where some of the upperclassmen were a little more old school traditional. And as I was about to graduate, I could see the kind of cusp of what is now known as the millennial generation. Some of the beginnings of the hypersensitive snowflake generation. And that carried over into my experiences in the Air Force. And so as I went through training, within weeks or months, because from my basic to advanced training, it was several months. And within those months, I had seen the newer troops coming in who were very, very much spoiled and soft. And it's only gotten worse, to be honest with you, since I've been out, which is a reflection of what I started to see in high school in the early mid-90s. Carried over into my experience in the military. And so by the time I was about to get out in 2001, there was quite a different expectation of what was to be carried out from some of these newer troops. So I can only imagine now that it's hard to believe, almost 20 years, or close to, about 17 years now since I've been out, that it's gotten even worse. Now, obviously, we have the best military in the world still. So I don't want to undermine that. There are people who are recycled or discharged or disciplined, but I think some of the standards have inevitably been adjusted to account for some of this generational gap and conditioning. And so a lot of the political correctness, a lot of the quote-unquote triggering has taken place even within the ranks of the military that is very unfortunate. And so I can speak kind of to that direct experience and kind of seeing how that would play out. And if it was playing out in the military, it was even more so playing out in society. And so I was kind of capsulated in that and got kind of the wind of some of those trends. And so when I got out, it was quite a shock to see how much had actually changed, even more so than what I thought when I started my undergraduate degree. So some of the things I kind of observed, as I kind of touched on, was the hypersensitivity, the political correctness, and also, more controversial, the acceptance of homosexuality. There's always been, even historically, in the Roman and Greek Empire, trends of homosexuality. So I'm not debating the history of things. But within American military ranks, there hasn't been as much acceptance or flamboyancy that was greatly enhanced or greatly more accepted during my time in the Air Force. Whether it was male or female, and just experimenting with things and being very much more open. It was under the don't ask, don't tell time frame, which transitioned to now being essentially completely open, and even acceptance of transgender troops. But when I was in, it was still kind of that transitional phase. There was still kind of that buffer time frame, where it was still kind of taboo and still kind of hush-hush, but at the same time, there was still kind of these, well, it is what it is, you don't really judge people, you don't really, take things for granted, or, I'm sorry, you don't really disassociate with people because and personally, I don't believe in disassociating or hating anybody. But the idea that it was as accepted was kind of an adjustment. Well, it was quite an adjustment, actually. And as I said, for some of the older troops, it was even more of an adjustment. Some of the newer troops, it was still relatively adjusting. But as I started as I went on in my enlistment, it got even less and less taboo. And so just coming from that perspective of where the institution itself was far more traditional and kind of laid the groundwork for not just homosexuality, but as I said and touched on, the hypersensitivity of the, if you will, millennial generation that was seen. And because I was in a combat-related career field, the only one in the Air Force, it really caused a lot of conflict because we were expected to be heavily disciplined, very thick-skinned, very, we weren't the Marines and we weren't Army combat. But for the Air Force, we still were expected to be very thick-skinned and not complain when we were out in the field, when we had to, endure a lot of different situations or criticism, whether it was intentional or in jest. There wasn't the, well, what did you say to me? Or, I can't believe you said that. That's not, right. And I'm not even talking anything racial or sexist or derogatory, just the fact that there'd be a higher up that would try and discipline some of the younger troops. It was very apparent that they were very much more pampered and very much more sensitive to these types of criticisms and, for all actuality, forms of discipline. After all, we were in the military and specifically in security forces. So the understanding is it's unfortunate where our society has come and it's seeped even into the military. And as I said, it's not as though our military has fallen apart, but it is something that I found very discomforting and disheartening that this is where the trend is going. I don't know where it stands now, again, being out about 17 years, but some of these, trends I don't think have gotten the other swing of the pendulum. And so, where it will stand in the next 5-10 years, God willing, it will still be a very strong and vital and the most powerful military in the world. But it would be quite a shell shock to me if I was to actually go back in, which, obviously I'm not. But it would just be interesting to be a little fly on the wall and see how some of the basic training and advanced training is now taught and conducted in some of these career fields in the armed forces. So I might touch on that a little bit more and go into details. As I said, I'm kind of free-flowing this, so I don't want to ramble on some of these ideas. But I do want to address something else that we're still really working on and we're fine-tuning. In fact, I was just sitting down and going over some of the curriculum that we're going to be doing for the 3 pillars of conservatism. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up and why I've constantly brought it up and why we post it very often on our website and online, on Facebook and social media, etc., is because I don't want to overlook these fundamentals. And it may, for some people, feel a little redundant or boring or, well, you've already said this before, we already know what they are. And yes, there are 3 main articles that we've posted as to what these pillars are, which are biblical precedent, natural law, and federalism. The problem is, especially as I was saying with our younger generations, there's a bit of an attention deficiency, so to speak, short attention span. And so unless we reinforce these ideas, they're very easily forgotten. And even if you don't have, if you're older or not part of the younger generation, if you've gone through high school, college, you know that just by restudying something, revisiting something, it helps keep it afresh. And so what we're doing is we are developing some type of curriculum that we've been working on for a while now, and we want to give some further in-depth background to these pillars. For example, what does it mean to state biblical precedent as one of the pillars? Well, without going too far into it in this episode, we're looking at kind of how the historical morals were set for, in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, and progressing to the New Testament, which carried over into Rome and the rest of Europe, and the idea that they were based on some of these Judeo-Christian norms or morals. So the idea that the Bible serves as this guideline, we're looking at not just a theological examination of it, but the historical examination of it, and some of even the non-biblical things, such as the Roman ideas of natural law, which is the second pillar. So would they kind of cross almost like a Venn diagram between these three pillars of how they work. And so why we're doing this is it is very critical to understand that we have a common playing field. There's common ground that conservatives can meet, because it is very easy to point to one politician and say, oh, well, if you like that person, then you're not a conservative. Or that person, if you like that person, then that makes you a conservative. Because based on what they do and what they say and how they conduct themselves, that qualifies your ideas as conservative. Or even the party itself, even, the Republican, Democrat are the two main parties, but there's other sub-parties in our system that define conservatism. And it's unfortunate because we isolate people, we compartmentalize people, and whether or not they are conservative or feel or follow conservatism based on whether or not they accept a certain person's ideas or platform or a certain party's ideas or platform. And the beauty, we think, of conservatism is its rich history, is its very critical thinking, is its objectivity to not be part of the groupthink that liberalism tends to be and provides for those who follow it. And so that's why we want to give a solid foundation for the three pillars of conservatism, so that at the very least, if we can all agree, or I shouldn't even say all, because then we're going into groupthink there, but if the vast majority of people understand what these three pillars are and why we believe they do define conservatism, then we can have disagreements on some of the nuances. We can have a different opinion on some of the different people or politicians, on some of the parties and their platforms and ideas. We can have some different ranges of where we fall on certain issues. But as long as we're using these pillars as our parameters, then we can at least be consistent within a conservative idea, within a conservative philosophy and platform. And so we are reinforcing this and reiterating it in several times, but hopefully in different ways, and very soon in a much more in-depth way, where there are certain types of ideas that we're able to expand on, certain types of historical figures that we're able to take a look at and examine and see where they maybe have fallen a little more conservative than other times. And so that's where, as we move forward, we're always going to come back to these three ideas. And we've reduced it down to these because we feel that they do encompass and can provide an even bigger picture. But so long as we understand what these three ideas are, biblical precedent, natural law, and federalism, it's very hard to say that that is a liberal or socialist or far left platform or idea to start from. If we embrace these ideas as what conservatism is, we believe it is a very consistent way to examine our conservative political philosophy as ordinary citizens, as people who may not be heavily involved in the political arena, or even if we are. But just the idea that if we're able to come on this common platform, we're able to extend the hand to other people who may have different opinions, who may have voted one way or another, who may have a different idea, and not say, oh, well, you're not conservative because you don't accept so-and-so's platform, or you're not a conservative because you didn't vote for, and you didn't, et cetera, et cetera. The line goes on. I'm sure you have been attacked. Your conservatism has been questioned, whether you're on one side or the other of one person or party. And so we want to really try and be inclusive with as many people as we can without compromising our ideas, without feeling as though we're having to give up our foundation, but still be able to have a discussion with those who may not completely agree. And so that's why we want to focus on these main pillars. Once again, biblical precedent, natural law, and federalism. As I say, without rambling on too much longer, I just wanted to bring that up and address that so that in the near future, you can be prepared, and we will have even more written materials on what we're doing. To me, I'm ecstatic. We know it's been a little while, but as we've said before, we want to make this as beneficial and productive as possible. And so it really will be a type of, I don't want to say college class or course, but it will be very academic in understanding some of these bullet points, some of this syllabus essentially is what we're developing to move forward with each of these three pillars. And so hopefully you're able to get the most out of them and have a much broader discussion rather than confining your conservatism to one person or one party. So with that being said, I hope I didn't ramble on too much and have too many gaps. I don't think I really had as many gaps as much as I may have not confined myself to saying things shortly or in brief. We hope that you have enjoyed what we've been able to do thus far, and I want to just remind you again, GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Folks, we are standing with you, and we have been profusely attacked by Facebook censoring, YouTube restriction. That might have been a Freudian slip there. YouTube restricting things, just various ways that the powers that be online have tried to confine us, and it's not just us. You may have even personally experienced it. Other bigger names than us have experienced it. Just one really big name, Dennis Prager, has attempted to sue YouTube. We have a mixed opinion on that kind of battle, but just the idea that it's obviously something that conservatives have had to experience online trying to get our message out. And so we do want to encourage you to prayerfully consider what you can contribute and invest in. It goes a long way to try and keep us online and producing even more materials that we've discussed. Once again, that's GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. GoFundMe.com/Conservatives Corner. Thanks for joining us once again, and we hope you will invite your friends and family to join us in our efforts to champion conservatism for generations to come.
Not a woman or a girl.